fact, I'll show you real quick a picture. This is my dad right here in the bottom left-hand corner. He's handcuffed and shackled. This picture right here is in the edition for World Book Encyclopedia under Vietnam of 1967, but he was the 14th POW in Vietnam. He was the first one ever shot down with a surface-to-air missile flying an F-4. He shot down July 24th, 1965. I was 13 years old. I come home. It was in the middle of the summer, and I'd done something, but I was gone. And when I came home, there was all these staff cars sitting in our yard, our driveway. There was air police cars. There was all kinds of military cars. And being a military kid, you know, boom, I knew something was up. But as I walked through the front door, a full colonel grabs me by the arm, and I could see my mom over in the kitchen, and she was crying, and there was a chaplain with her. And the guy kind of drags me down the hall. He says, "Which room's yours?" I said, "That bottom one at the back right there." And he goes, "Sit down." And he put me down on the bed. He said, "Your dad died today. He was shot down with a SAM missile. His F-4 exploded. You're the man of the family today." I said, "What?" And I started crying. So, you know, he goes, "Hey, dry it up." He said, "You can't cry. Your dad wouldn't be proud of you." He said, you gotta be the man of the family from now on. Well, at 13 years old, I wasn't sure what the man of the family meant, but at the same time, you know, I said, well, I guess this is it. And so I went 3 months thinking my dad was dead. And then UPI came out, and in 65, they just had these teletype machines that would print pictures. And the Red Cross had picked up a picture of my dad being escorted through the streets of Hanoi, and he was handcuffed and shackled. And my mom, you know, had the picture. I was at school when this happened, and she called, and I came back home, and this time the press was in our yard. And when I walked through the door, my mom had this picture in her hand, and she dragged me down the hall again. And then we went in the room, and she said, "Don't say nothing. Don't say nothing. Look at this picture. Your dad's alive. Your dad's alive." And now, you know, I wasn't the smartest 13-year-old kid, and not the smartest 69-year-old man now, but I'm going, like, it really puzzled me. I'm going, wait a minute. I thought he died. I thought they confirmed he died. And they said, well, I guess they didn't know, but my dad actually, the back seat guy, my dad was the aircraft commander, so he's in the front. The back seat guy got blown up, but my dad ejected. Anyway, they didn't bring him to Hanoi right away. They paraded him around in villages all around Hanoi, and they'd stake him out, and they'd rev up the people saying, "This is those war criminals that are dropping bombs," and they let him spit on him and beat on him, and did it for like 3 months before they brought him to Hanoi. So then when they brought the picture in, because he was the 14th POW, the United States didn't really know how to handle security-wise the families, and so my mom had been in the Navy, so she was military, and so we didn't say anything. My mom had already called the base by the time I got home, and when I walked into the living room, all of a sudden the door flew open again. Now all these air police came in, and the CIA came in, and they ripped all the cameras away from them, took all of their recording equipment, and told the media to leave it. And so when we sat down, they told us, said, "Listen, we don't know what to do. We really don't know how to handle this. So we'd rather not expose that you know your dad's alive and you've identified him and nobody else has identified him. But at the same time, if you expose and say that, then the media, everybody," and he says, because there has never been a war declared with Vietnam, they don't have to apply the Geneva Convention and treatment.
How often did you hear back from your dad per year?
We got a total of 7 letters in 7.5 years, and they weren't one a year. It just kind of came sporadic. And one of the things, John, is we had to go to the mailbox, and if we saw a letter coming from my dad, one of the rules we had with getting mail from my dad was, when we saw a letter in the mailbox from him, we weren't allowed to just reach in and grab it. We'd have to actually put our hands in and kind of hold it by the edges of the letter and kind of balance it in there, or else put gloves on and get it out. And then they would come, the military people would come and open the letter themselves at our house. and they would, go over it and over it, take it with them, whatever. But they would make sure my dad's fingerprints were on it. They would make sure that what my dad was saying in the letter was decoded, because some of them didn't make any sense. But my dad was actually releasing names of other POWs by a code that they were tapping through the walls with their little tin cups, and they were telling, who was in there, because the Vietnamese people weren't releasing all the names of all the POWs. So they were trying to communicate through these letters that we got. Now, because my dad was one of the oldest and had been a prisoner in Germany and two-time POW, he was always kind of featured on any video that they would send, like they were pretending to decorate Christmas tree at Christmas time, or they were opening up packages that had been sent by family members to get supplies and stuff. And it was all propaganda. He never got any of that. And he really didn't decorate any Christmas trees. It was just a setup. But being that the war was like it was and never a declaration of war, they didn't, like I said, they didn't have to abide to the Geneva Convention. So it was all anything goes. And my dad wrote a book, and I'll get your email, and I've got it on JPEG if you'd like to read it. It's not exciting, and it's not drama, and it's not based on sympathy. My dad was the real deal. He was the John Wayne professional soldier, and he didn't want any sympathy. He was doing his job, and after it was over, there was no remorse. But when he wrote his book, he just tried to hand down the story of his and my mom's life to grandchildren or great-grandchildren or whatever, but to pass it on. So it's not one of those Arnold Schwarzenegger stories, but at the same time, I've read other POW books, and I know exactly what my dad went through. I know all the torture. He was tortured relentlessly, and they would torture him at the beginning to get any information about the fighter that he was flying, the F-4. It was the fastest one the United States had. And then also to get any information on any other military aircraft. My dad, I think he flew something like 82 different aircraft while he was in the military between World War II and Vietnam. And so he had a high knowledge of not only war, but he had a high knowledge of military aircraft. So they tortured him relentlessly. And the tortures, anybody can read about Vietnam through different books, but I've got a few people that have sent me books that actually paralleled my dad's capture. For when he was first shot down, he had a big piece of shrapnel in his leg, and they caught him, and then they drug him around, like I said, and would tie a chain around his neck and stake him out in these little villages and let him torture him. And then they finally brought him to Vietnam. He was like a trophy. And so then they brought him into Hanoi. But once he got there, it got worse, because solitary confinement was their main thing, and a psychological torture. He had a light bulb in his room. He slept on a concrete block bed with no pillows, no nothing. He could only sit on the edge of his bed until he was brought out into the yard to do a few exercises, then went back in. And then he would sit on his edge of his bed the rest of the day. If he moved, they would come in and they'd beat him with a bamboo pole with a, what is that, fan wheel? What is that rubber thing, that belt, a fan belt tied to the end of the rubber pole. And then, everything was regimented. He had no windows or anything. And my dad has credit for creating the tapping on the wall, because he didn't use Morse code. He knew they'd be smart enough to understand Morse code, or they'd figure it out. But my dad created a code that he was an unbelievable mathematician, and he created this code that they used for the rest of the war. And so he would tap on the wall, morning, God bless, and simple things, but not enough to grab attention, because anytime they thought you were communicating at the very beginning, they would take you out and torture you. And they had a place called the quiz room where they would take you in there and torture you relentlessly. And I mean, my dad was smart enough to know that don't tap out and give in right away. you know, show that you have the heart and the guts to stand it, because they wouldn't respect you unless you did. So he would take the torture till he couldn't take it anymore. And then finally he would just, you know, whatever you want to ask, he'd ask, but they would just give him lies. I mean, he just lied to him. In 1967, that picture I showed you where he's being marched through the streets of Hanoi, they were going to execute him. My dad was the first one in line, handcuffed and shackled to another guy. And they took him to a baseball field, and they were going to publicly execute all the POWs. They declared them war criminals. Well, the president at the time made a national address: if they shoot the first American prisoner of war, that we will declare full-scale nuclear war on Vietnam. So they did a big about face and took him back through while the people started rioting. And my dad said they stripped him down naked, ripping at his clothes and everything, till they finally got him back. But when they got back to the prison camp, Hanoi Hilton, they took my dad and several other POWs and they tied him to trees, and they spread eagled my dad. They tied his feet spread apart. They tied his arms spread apart, and they left him there for 48 hours in the elements, the mosquitoes, the, you know, whatever. And they'd constantly walk by and kick him in the groin and beat on him. And so the other POWs could see through the slit in the door, see what he was going through. And the other POWs that were out there with him going through that. So he's a pretty big deal so far as in the POW world, you know. So
and the time
I mean, it was a terrible time for him, but you would have never known it. He was such a good guy. When he came home, of course, there was a big gap. I saw him the last time at 13 years old. Now I'm 21. And I was the man of the family at that point. I wasn't sure if I was a good man, but at the same time, I'd taken care of my mother and my sister and, you know, tried to do the best I can. And then when he landed in Maxwell Air Force Base, Montgomery, Alabama, because that was the nearest hospital for POWs when he came home. And when they came to get us with staff cars, we were in some guest quarters, and they come to my mom and said, okay, only the wives. And they said to my mom, says, nobody else, just you. We're going to drive you out there. We're going to get your husband, put him in the car, and we'll bring him right straight back. And I looked at the guy, and says, well, that ain't happening that way. And he looked at me and he says, what do you mean? I said, I'm going to be in the damn car. And he goes, no, you're not. No, you're not. No family members. I go, you ain't going to stop me. If you don't let me get in the car, I'm going to walk over to the runway, and I'm going to be right there on the runway, and I'm going to blow through the security, and I'm going to be there with my dad. When he left, I was on the runway. When he comes home, I'm going to be on that runway. And so the colonel looks at my mom, and I remember him saying, have you got any control over him? And my mom just shook her head and said, he's a man. He's going to do what he wants to do. And I agree with him. So anyway, my sister stayed there, but I got in the front seat. Now this colonel's briefing me the whole way. Said, okay, here's the deal. We don't want any confusion. We don't want any chaos. When your dad gets off the plane, because he's a commander, he's going to say a couple words, and then he's going to come to the car. I want you to get out, and I want you to open the door. That's it. I said, okay, no problem. When my dad got off the plane, he got down and he couldn't say anything because there were so many POWs left over there that he just said, Old Glory's the most beautiful of them all. And I bolted. I took off running. I ran up to the plane. I scooped him up, bear hugged him, and started running with him. And I was crying. I couldn't even talk to him. It was like I was paralyzed. But at the same time, I had him. And my dad, I can remember him saying in my ear, son, it's you, right? Is that you? I said, man, you're big. And he goes, I hope it's you. And the air police were all over me, and I just was pie-facing people. But I got him, and I'll send you pictures of that sometime if you'd like to see him. It's pretty emotional, but at the same time, I was in that car, and, it was an amazing thing. I can't describe how it is when you think your dad died at one point, and then 8 years later, there he is. You know what I'm saying?
Did you lose part of him in Vietnam? So many guys over there and tortured and came back and weren't quite the same. And a second question, did you ever meet John McCain? I assume that he probably did, at least later. Did he meet him in Vietnam as well?
Well, they had reunions. they had reunions for POWs every year, and they were at H. Ross Perot's house in Texas, and they'd all go out there and get together. Now, my dad would go to two different reunions, one for World War II, where he was shot down there at 19 and was a POW in Germany. And then he also went to the one for Vietnam. And yeah, of course, he knew John McCain. They all knew each other. I mean, my dad had a lot of respect from them guys because he was 39 when he was shot down. It was 20 years separation from when he was 19, shot down in Germany out of a B-17 to Vietnam, where he was shot down out of the F-4. Wow. And so as an older soldier being in there, and my dad, helped other Vietnam prisoners if he had the opportunity. At first, the first like 5 years or 4 years possibly, it was all solitary confinement. He wasn't allowed to communicate. Then they started getting crowded. They started to be more and more POWs. And so my dad actually started to get a roommate here or there, but some of them needed medical attention. So Dad had the opportunity to know a few more close and personal, and he actually aided in helping some of them. That was part of my premise for the Congressional Medal of Honor, because to me, when I attempted to get him the Medal of Honor, I got the book and I got the qualifications from Randolph Air Force Base in Texas for the Medal of Honor. And it basically said bravery above and beyond in the face of the enemy. Well, most men that serve in the military, especially that go to war, usually have a career of about 2 to 3 years and are in combat maybe 6 months total. My dad had been 11 months POW in Germany and 7 years and 7 months. 7 years and 7 months in Vietnam. So I said, there's no telling how many acts of bravery he did in the face of the enemy, but he did give medical attention to some guys that to this day said they owe him their lives. And so I based a lot of it on that. Then I based it on the simple fact is his total time in the military. He spent 1/3 of his time in the military being a prisoner of war in a foreign country for his country and sacrificing his freedom and being tortured. And so, it just all made sense, but I was turned down. I've got unbelievable correspondence right all the way up to the White House, every congressman, senator, everybody, even Mr. Perot tried to help me. And they turned me down saying that family members can't nominate family members for the Medal of Honor. And so I started to turn to some of the military guys, but some of the people that were commanders of him were already dead. Some of them, were mentally a little bit off balance. And so it just didn't work out. And I don't know, he's decorated pretty highly, John. He had 5 Purple Hearts, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star twice, Distinguished Flying Cross twice, and a numerous amount. While we're talking, I'm just going to kind of like show you real quick down here into this. And this kind of gives you an idea of, if you can bear with this. Let me know if you can see this all right.
Wow, those are his medals.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, this is actually the cup he ate in for Vietnam for 7.5 years. And I have his uniform that they had him wear in Vietnam as a POW, and I have the one from Germany also. So I have all of the reminders of it, and even the POW bracelets. I know you're old enough to remember when they had POW bracelets for guys in Vietnam and everything. And so, he was the real deal. And it's hard for me sometimes. I've kind of lost an interest in other sports when the flag and kneeling, and I understand people are trying to make statements, but it really hits hard in my family. So, it's just, I take it a little bit more personal.